Everybody. We are going to get started with our Water Conservation Grant Fund pre-application workshop. Thank you so much for joining us, and our hope for today is that you will learn enough information to make you feel prepared and ready and excited to apply for the funding and resources that we have available under this grant. Before we get too far down the road, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all attendees have been muted on entering the webinar. That way we don't get the background noise. Please type your questions and comments into the chat as a result. We've got some dedicated time kind of in the middle of the presentation and then at the end of the presentation for everybody to ask those questions. We will unmute you at that point so that we can have a little bit more of a robust back and forth. So you'll have the chance to ask those, but make sure you get your question in the chat so we know kind of who to call on and we can have a queue for that purpose. In addition, if you miss anything or want to share this, a recording of the presentation is going to be available on our website. We'll also email that out to everybody who has registered for the webinar here today. So with that, let's dive right into the background and questions on the Water Conservation Grant Fund. So there are a couple of things that I think we should talk about before we, really get into what the grant background is going to be. The first is I do want to introduce the rest of the team that's on the call with me. We have Lindsay Jones, who is our Assistant Director of Projects. She'll be talking to you later on in the presentation about some of the technical aspects of the grant. We also have Samantha Lemke. She's our Program Supervisor here at WIFA, and Garrett Corral is our Chief Information Officer, as well as Lori Gelson, our Grants Coordinator. So we have a host of information and a host of knowledge on this site today. So hopefully we can get most of those questions answered. But having said that, the WIFA team's been working really, really hard to build out this grant. It is the first of its kind. We're very excited about it. But because it's the first of its kind and because we're all sort of learning this together, there may be some questions you have today that our answer is we don't know or we don't know yet. Still ask those questions because that'll let us know what other options or what other things our potential customers need to know. We can get those answers to you and continue that communication. And we'll try to get you that communication as soon as possible, again, because we're very anxious to see your applications, to see you applying for this funding. We want to get it on the ground doing good things as soon as possible. I will also do just a quick 101 overview of the Water Infrastructure Finance Authority because some of you will be very familiar with the things that WIFA does. Some of you, this may be one of your first interactions with our organization. And so if that's the case, welcome. We're excited to have you. There are 5 funds that WIFA administers. Our original 2 are the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And these are the funds that are loans and other assistance that can go out to clean and drinking water projects across the state. A lot of success with those funds over the last 30 years, and that really has given us the historical background and knowledge to be successful in administering the 3 new funds, one of which is the reason you're here, and that's the Water Conservation Grant Fund. It says grants to government and non-government agencies for projects that decrease water use. Our Water Supply Development Funds, which is loans and technical assistance and grants to water providers outside of the urban centers. And then, of course, the Long-Term Water Augmentation Fund, which is that historic investment in water that is for projects that import water into Arizona. The Water Conservation Grant Fund is the first of our funds that we have built out for the purpose of the new funding that we were given last year by the legislature. And there's a couple of reasons that it's the first one that we're building out. One is that it's really important that we get some of these conservation projects on the ground. But the other is that we're a little time constrained in some of the funding that we have. And so we will get to that in a moment as well. So what is the Water Conservation Grant Fund? It's part of what I'm calling a holistic approach to securing Arizona's water future. So we talked about those augmentation funds and some of the water supply development, which is really about finding new sources of water, bringing new sources of water into use. The Conservation Fund is about making sure that we're using our existing and any potential new sources as effectively and as efficiently as possible. The goals of the fund, we want it to result in projects that put long-term sustainable reductions in water use on the ground. That's improving water use efficiency, improving water reliability for communities. Anything that comes to conservation, that's what we want to fund under this grant. For the grant, there are $200 million available, and that money came from the American Rescue Plan Act. ARPA funds, you'll hear it called, COVID relief money, you'll hear it called. At any rate, it's federal dollars that are coming into WIFA for this purpose. Because of the funding source, we are constrained on time for this first round of the grant. The obligation deadline for grant programs under the Water Conservation Grant Fund is June of 2024. That's the deadline by which we need to obligate the funds for the purposes of ARPA. And the expenditure deadline, so the deadline by which the funds actually need to be expended, that's December of 2026. So that's a pretty aggressive timeline, and we know that that can be challenging for a lot of the projects that you have put on the ground. But again, that's why we tried to get this grant out as soon as we possibly could, while still, being industrious and making sure that we are doing all of the necessary vetting and transparency that we have. A single water conservation program under this grant fund maxes out at $3 million, and a single water conservation project will max out at $250,000. There's also at least a 25% match required. I know there are a lot of questions about the three things that I just said, so let's talk about those a little more in depth, starting with that distinction between projects and programs. So first of all, we do not have a statutory definition that distinguishes between these two things. There is not a lined out rule, there is not a set of criteria, but we do have some clues in the statute and some examples within the statute of what programs and projects mean. But what that means is that this is going to be a fact-intensive interpretation. This is going to be something that we have to determine based on the application. So as you're applying, it makes a lot of sense to give with us some indication of which you think this is and why. So a program, we can safely say, is something that we're going to look at that has multiple locations, there are multiple deliverables, and those all happen over a period of time. So the example in the statute are education and research programs that's specifically outlined in the statute, and those education and research would reduce consumption or increase efficiency of water use. So that's something that the statute says explicitly is a program. The projects, on the other hand, we're interpreting as something that is one location, one deliverable, one time. It is very much a one-off. The example that's given in the statute is a project that coordinates the management of groundwater storage or recovery. So that's what we have to go on. Again, it's going to be a fact-intensive determination. We're happy to continue answering those questions, but this is about as clear guidance as we can give you at the moment. We'll continue to update that as we have more specifics and maybe more examples to give to you. Now on the match requirements, this is another one where we have a lot of questions that we've been asked, a lot of questions that I think we still have to answer. But what we know for sure is that there is a 25% match required, and that's on top of the award that you're given. So the easiest way to do that is through an example. To be eligible for a grant of $250,000, entities must have $62,500 in matching contributions available. So you'll get the full amount of the $250,000 when you have that 25% of that up for match. Now, what monies can be part of the match? It can either be monetary or in kind. And under the statute, it says that monies from any other source may satisfy the match requirement. So that's the language that we're working to interpret. Any other source is obviously very broad. We've had questions about whether we can use ARPA funds from other sources. We've had questions about whether we can use the SRF funds. We're still working on interpretation for all of those specifics. But continue to ask those questions, continue to send those questions to your WIFA staff. We'll be happy to sort of make those determinations and help you as you're starting to fill out those applications. The in-kind is similar if you've done other grants before, right? That's going to be not monetary, but it's going to be things like staff time. It's going to be things like technical assistance, those kinds of things that can match and can be part of that match. But it's not necessarily you have to have that cash up front. So that's what we know about the match requirements. So what's actually eligible? We know some of the background, but what are the projects that can actually be funded with the money from this program? The statute lines out specific criteria, but it's broad criteria. It's a lot of projects that can fall under the umbrella that was created. And so these are sort of the broad categories, I guess I would say: education and research, rainwater harvesting, gray water systems, efficiency upgrade, landscaping changes, turf removal, drought-resistant landscaping incentives, practices that reduce water use, groundwater conservation and recharge. If you can look at your project and explain why it fits one of these criteria, then that's something that could be eligible for funding under the Water Conservation Grant Fund. The idea is allowing communities and water systems to install and to build and to integrate and to educate in ways that are going to promote water conservation in Arizona. Again, part of that holistic approach to securing Arizona's water future. So who is eligible? If you have a project like that you want to get on the ground, can this grant actually go to your entity? The statute outlines the eligibility criteria as well. It includes cities and towns and other governmental entities. So in the language, it talks about anything that's statutorily created, any districts. We have had questions and have confirmed that includes a school district. So if there's something that a school district, either in an educational capacity or in a conservation efficiency capacity, wants to do, absolutely eligible for that. Conservation districts as well, the under the branch of the NRCS, those are available, or those are eligible for funding. And then also an environmental NGO. So if you're partnering with one of these public entities that's already listed under the statute, so a city, a town, a county, a municipality, school district, an Arizona or a conservation district, that NGO can also receive funding as long as they show that proof of that partnership, and the application shows how that partnership is going to work out. Most likely that's going to mean you're going to include kind of a letter of commitment or a letter of support from that partner, and you'll outline how that project is a partnership project. However, that's the current eligibility. So we know that eligibility is going to stay. Those entities that I just listed out, that's absolutely going to remain the case. But there is a bill currently pending at the Arizona legislature, and that bill is Senate Bill 1390. And there's a little bit of background politics to go into it, but the easiest way to describe it is it's a cleanup bill. When the original legislation that authorized this grant program and the long-term water augmentation came into play, there were a lot of last-minute negotiations that went into that legislation. And as a result, some of the intent of the bill didn't actually get encapsulated into the language of the bill. One of those intentions was that there be additional eligibility for the Water Conservation Efficiency Grants, or for the Water Conservation Grant Fund, specifically for tribal entities. That didn't happen in the original language, and 1390 would fix that. The way that it would fix that is by modifying that eligibility to include a water provider. That means that eligibility is going to be consistent among all three of the new funds. The definition of water provider does include tribal entities, and it also includes private water systems. So if you're here today representing a private water system and you have some ideas for your system that would work or that would be eligible for funding, once Senate Bill 1390 passes, and we are confident that it will, you will also have that eligibility. The question is, when is that eligibility going to come into play? So we know the grant deadlines for this current round of funding or for this current application. Will you be able to apply in this current one? That depends. It depends on whether the legislature passes this bill with an emergency clause. And what that would mean is that the bill would pass with 2/3 of the vote of the legislature, and it would become immediately effective upon enactment. If it doesn't pass with that emergency clause, we have to wait till the general effective date of the legislation, which is anybody's guess, because it's, I believe, 60 days after the end of the legislative session, and we don't know when the end of the legislative session is. So WIFA is working very hard with our legislature to try to make sure that everyone who's voting on that bill does understand the importance of the timing. But the long story or the short story is that we do anticipate additional eligibility for the Water Conservation Grant Fund. We just don't know when that eligibility is going to come into play. So if you are a tribal entity or you're here representing a private water system, hang tight. We absolutely have every intention of including you in the program. It's just a matter of when. All right, so let's say you have your project, you have your program, you have your application in. What is going to be the criteria that you need to consider when you're writing your application to make it as attractive as possible for this funding? That's also outlined in the statute. And so that is available on our website. It's available on AZLedge as well. But this is sort of our paraphrase of it to help you understand it. So what is that criteria? Will it result in long-term sustainable reductions in water use, or improve efficiency in a long-term way, or improve reliability in a long-term way? That's kind of the overarching goal, right? For costs and benefits, what is the cost benefit of this project? What are you going to gain from it versus what it's going to cost? And that includes environmental costs and benefits as well. That's something we want to consider in every application. Something else to keep in mind, as we talked about, this isn't the only fund that WIFA administers. There are 5 other funds, including our 2 state revolving funds. So is grant funding a better fit than the state revolving funds, or are the state revolving funds a better fit? That's something that we'll take into consideration here at WIFA as well, and determine whether if maybe financing under an SRF would be a better idea. We'll kind of try to push you in that direction. Does the project have multiple benefits? Are we seeing benefits on multiple scales to multiple communities, to multiple people? That's absolutely something we want to look at, including whether there's the partnership aspect to the grant, I think will make it attractive as well. Are you leveraging other funding sources? Again, that goes to partnerships and who's benefiting. Do you actually have the qualifications as the applicant to do the project that you're asking to do? That's going to be something we want to make sure that we're putting the money into good hands. And so that's something you'll want to prove in your application. How feasible? Is it a proven technology? It is a proven project. And then also the public will have the opportunity to comment on these projects through our public meetings of the Water Conservation Grant Fund Committee and the WIFA board. So we will take those into consideration, or the board, I should say, will take those into consideration as well. And that gets to who's actually going to consider all of this criteria and what is all of that going to look like. There's a 3-step process that will happen once these applications are submitted. The first is an administrative review by WIFA staff. We'll take a look at that project, determine whether the application is complete, make sure that the boxes are checked, and that it's ready to be passed on to the committee for review. The Water Conservation Grant Fund Committee is a new committee that was created by statute for the purpose of developing and the purpose of analyzing these projects. They met for the first time last week and elected a chairman, began the process of being a committee. Of course, they didn't have applications to look at yet, but we're getting that underway. And what they'll do is review all of the materials. They'll have an open and robust discussion about the grant applications and projects. And then their vote will be a recommendation to the WIFA board. Do we recommend that the WIFA board fund this application or do we not? What comments do they have? Once they've made those recommendations, they will go to the WIFA board for approval. The board meets every month and will have an opportunity to evaluate those projects on a regular basis. Both the committee and the board are geographically diverse. They represent large counties, small counties when it comes to the board. The Conservation Grant Review Committee is also diverse in who the membership is. There are representatives from conservation organizations. There are representatives from natural resource districts. There are representatives from big water systems or small water systems, big water systems. It's a very varied group. So they will have a lot of brain power together and have a very fair and balanced representation as well as they're analyzing these projects. So that's what will happen. That 3-step process, the ultimate board approval, and then we will start the process of actually dispersing those grants. The current grant cycle, as you all likely know, opened on April 18th. That was last week. It will close 30 days later on May 19th, 2023 at 5:00 p.m. Again, we're working with aggressive timelines. However, this is not going to be the only grant cycle that we open for the Water Conservation Grant Fund. These 30 days are not your only opportunity to take advantage of these resources. What we anticipate are several grant cycles, and so expect several more this year as long as we have funding, probably some that open relatively soon after that May 19th date. So if you're looking at and you're saying, I have a great program, I have a great project, but this timeline I can't quite fit, that's okay. We want to see them continue. Of course, we want to see some in this one too. So also, if you just have questions or you're not entirely sure that your application is perfect, that's all right. Give it to us. Let's work together. Let's learn as we go and learn together and get these resources on the ground quickly, but also effectively to make sure that we have everything that we need. I know that was a lot of information that I just covered. So before we go to questions on the Conservation Grant Fund specifically, I do want to do a quick pitch for the landing page. If you go to azwifa.gov, click over funding options, and then click on the Water Conservation Grant Fund, you'll see a page that's screenshotted here. It has helpful links, including a draft application that you can use to start preparing and start answering those questions, a one-pager to give you just a quick overview, our notice of funding opportunity, which is a much more detailed outline. Hopefully everything you need to see will be there. The recording of this webinar will be hosted there as well. So this isn't the only time you'll hear this information. You can go back, you can watch it again, you can find all that. And then of course, you can always come to us as WIFA staff and we can answer those questions too. All right, so now looks like we have quite a few questions in the chat. And I'm also going to bring up Lindsay Jones as well, because I think we'll probably end up tag teaming on most of them. So Sam, if you want to kind of start going down the list, we can start answering questions as they came in.
Sure. Yeah, we had a couple questions come in. The first one from Chris Leffler. Well, she had 3 questions. So the first one, can an individual agency receive funding for more than one grant application per award cycle?
There's nothing that is restrictive in statute on that. So I would say yes.
And especially if they're distinct projects,
Yeah.
there would be nothing to prevent that.
Right. And then the next question is, if an agency is awarded funding during any given cycle, is that agency precluded from receiving funding during subsequent award cycles?
Again, nothing in statute that prohibits that. I think it might be something the board would take into consideration, but absolutely apply away.
And then their last question, does grant funding require that projects comply with Davis-Bacon, American Iron and Steel, etc.?
So because this is federal funding, there are some federal requirements. It is not as restrictive as the SRF federal requirements. So Davis-Bacon and AIS, not necessarily, but there are some other federal requirements that will be included because of the ARPA funding source.
Great. And the next question comes from Talia Bear. Well, there's two questions here. The first one, are tribes eligible to apply?
So Talia, that is the question that 1390 will hopefully answer. Again, we're confident that 1390 is going to pass. So the answer is yes. The question is just going to be, when will tribes be eligible to apply? We're hoping it's as soon as possible, maybe as soon as May, but it may be several months away if it has to go through the general effective date.
And their next question is there a page limit or word count for application questions?
Nope, there is not.
Right. The next question comes from Joanne Toms. Will you be able to go over the Water Conservation Grant Fund Excel file?
So I think what you're referring to there is the budget worksheet that we have posted on the website. I think we'd be happy to pull that up and go through it, especially after Lindsay finishes the ECIVIS conversation. We can absolutely look at that and just kind of walk through what it is and what it means.
Okay. And the next question comes from John Shepard. He has 4 questions, actually. The first one, please explain the difference between programs and projects. I think we went over that in the presentation. Hopefully, we explained that clearly to you. That his next question is, can an in-kind contributions count toward the matching requirements?
The answer is yes. In-kind contributions can absolutely count toward the match.
Next question from him is there a cap on indirect costs / overhead costs?
Not that we're aware of. So good question though, and
Yep.
we'll definitely confirm that.
And then the last question for NGOs, can they be lead applicant in their partnership applications?
Yes, they can. Just as long as that partnership does exist, the NGO can be the lead applicant and the recipient of the funds.
And then a question from Veronica Garcia, can personnel hours, for example, the project manager be used as in-kind match?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Just have to be careful with tracking and reporting on that, but yes, absolutely.
Another question from Veronica, what is the difference between, I think we answered that as well, the difference between a program and a project in the presentation, and we'll have the presentation slides available as well, so you can refer back to them. And then a question from Michael Serenade, does that include volunteer hours in your working interpretation? I'm not sure what he was referring to there.
I think for the
in-kind.
for the in-kind match, we'll have to follow up on that one. I'm not sure. So
Yeah, and again, it would have to be a lot of tracking if it is available, tracking and making sure you can put a value on that sort of thing.
right.
And then a question from Becky Zusi, will the grant end date match the expenditure deadline of December 2006 or 2026, sorry.
So unfortunately, we have to work with the obligation end date, really. So that would be June of 2024. We need to have all of these grants awarded and obligated out, and then all the grant recipients have until December of 2026 to spend down that money. Our hope is, though, that this will be a continuing grant program that will get other appropriations. So hopefully that is not our end date for this grant.
Yep.
And then a question from John Ford. He's just a little unclear. Is the match in addition to the project? So if it's the total, if the total project is $300 and $3,000 and $1,200, $5,000 with a $62,500 match, or is it $62,500 of a $250,000 project?
So under that example, it would be a 312,000 project cost. So the amount of money you would receive from the grant would be $250,000. Your match as the recipient would be $62,000 to make that 312. So the math it's confusing. Examples are a lot more helpful for sure. But yeah, so under that, it would be a $300,000 project because it would be a 250 plus your additional match.
And then Shina, Shay, as well as Nadine, asked both the same question. Can HOAs apply? Are they eligible?
So the way we would advise the HOA would be to work with the municipality or city that you're located in. So for example, if it were City of Goodyear and wanted to create an HOA program, that would absolutely be eligible for funding to the City of Goodyear, but it wouldn't go directly to the HOA.
Perfect. And then Veronica Garcia asked if we have several buildings that we want to remove turf and replace with drought resistant landscaping, can we consider this a program?
So that is a good question. Again, there's that sort of fact intensive or fact intensive determination there. What you would have to show, I think, is that that replacement would be taking place over a period of time, that there are multiple deliverables for that replacement, and multiple buildings, multiple beneficiaries for that turf removal. It absolutely is the kind of thing we're looking to fund. Just that distinction between program and project is something that you'd have to sort of line out in your narrative in the application.
And the next question comes from Gretchen Baumgartner. Can you clarify over a period of time for a program?
Yeah, so I think again, that's going to mean that it's a program where you have maybe phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, or step 1, step 2, step 3. And so your grant application would show us what those steps are and how you're going to accomplish those. And in terms of the second half of that question, how long do you have to spend that money? It's a pretty short timeline with that December of 2026. But if you can show us what the program looks like and what your steps are from the original or the initial grant application or granting that grant and then to the end of the process, I think that can satisfy that period of time.
And another question from Gretchen. How long do we have to spend this money? Can we use it over the course of several years?
So you have until that December of 2026 deadline. So yes, you can spend it over the course of several years between this year 23 and 2026, and whatever that needs to look like, you can outline in your application.
And the next question comes from Rob Owen. Would water conservation staff salary be an eligible expense?
We might need to get back to you on that one, Rob. I think there are ways that you could show that maybe within a project for sure, but I don't know if that standing alone is something that I can answer right now.
Yeah, we'll have to follow up on that one.
Yep.
Okay. For that. And Veronica, another question from Veronica. If not approved during the first round, can the same program/project be resubmitted?
Yeah, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. And I think our hope is that if there's not an approval during the first round, our transparent and open process will help you see how you could improve that application to be resubmitted with several tweaks and a little bit of change to make it more attractive on the next round. So yes, if it's not approved the first time around, don't get discouraged. We're happy to work with you, and you can take any feedback that you get from the committee and make it even better.
Great. The next question comes from Thomas G. Can we apply for both program and project funding?
Yeah, yep, you could, especially if you're giving distinct applications, once for a program and once for a project, nothing to prevent that.
Another one from Becky Zusi. Do you have an estimate on how much time it will take to hear about approval for applicants if the first one is due on May 19th?
So Lindsay, take that one. You're the timeline guru.
So we are hoping by the June board meeting, we will have projects and programs being presented to both the committee and the board for approval, and we'll have answers on who is approved by June, and then work towards having grant agreements in place after that. So hopefully within the next few months here.
Right. And then a question from John Ford, can other ARPA money be used as match?
Specifically, that is another one we're working on clarity and guidance for. That any other monies is pretty broad. We're trying to figure out what the other refers to, whether that other is water conservation grant monies in particular, or whether that other is ARPA money in particular. So John, we will absolutely continue to run that down and make sure we have a clear answer for you as soon as we can.
And a question from Sarah Carl, if you apply now and don't get approved this cycle, will the application go to the next funding cycle for consideration, or you have to apply again each cycle?
So my understanding, and Lindsay can correct me, is that you would have to apply again in each cycle, because the way that that would be approved or disapproved would be through a resolution to our board. And so if the board says yes or no on a resolution, that won't just come back before the board. We have to have something else to trigger that resolution to come back again. So yeah, it would be an additional application in the next cycle.
Yep.
Oops, I lost my place. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
There's just a lot of questions coming in right now.
Which is good. That's why we're here.
The next question is from Sandra. Can we use a different version of the budget template?
So unfortunately, I don't think that will be a possibility. We are working with the eCivis people and the governor's office to make sure that the budget template is as clear as possible, but we will be having to use that budget template.
Okay, perfect. And then a question from Paige. What does public comment entail?
Paige, that's a good question. So if you've watched any of our public meetings before, there is a section at the end of each meeting where the public gets a chance to comment on anything that was on the agenda in the meeting. We haven't really discussed exactly what that public comment will look like when it comes specifically to the Water Conservation Grant Fund applications, and whether there will be, a separate section for that. That's something our general counsel can definitely help us answer. So I don't know exactly the answer, but my anticipation is that that public comment will be the opportunity for members of the public to physically come or virtually join a meeting and express what they think about a project in that format.
And then the next question is from Steve Shepard. When will the eCivis link be posted?
The perfect segue into the next thing. So we're not entirely sure yet, but Lindsay will talk about that more as soon as we've gone through a few more of these questions.
Coming very soon, though.
Very soon.
Great. And then the next question, another one from Becky. Can you clarify the federal requirements that someone else asked about, Davis-Bacon, et cetera? Or will those be available on your website? You mentioned that Davis-Bacon might not be required, but other requirements are.
Absolutely. So being that it's going to be a grant program coming from federal funds, we have the grant requirements include things like the single audit. It's 2 CFR 200 that all recipients will have to comply with. That includes some requirements on how procurement is handled, single audit requirements. Like I said, it is a different requirements. Certainly Davis-Bacon is not in there, but if there's local wage labor requirements, which we don't have in Arizona, then that applies in ARPA. So there's certainly a lot of different requirements in the ARPA funding that we are working through creating guidance documents and make that more clear for all of the applicants. So that is more information to be coming, but it's all under 2 CFR 200 as far as requirements for you.
Okay. And then I accidentally skipped Gary Woodard's question. He asked, did SB 1390 get 2/3 support in the state Senate?
So Gary, it did not. But there were a couple of reasons for that. There were some concerns that were raised and ended up making that bill run on party line in the Senate. In the House, we're confident in getting the 2/3, and then what would happen is it would go back over to the Senate for a second vote. We've worked really hard with members of the Senate. I think we've been able to alleviate most of the concerns that they had, and so we're confident that we can get it back on. It's just going to mean one extra step before that can happen.
And Charmaine asks, what type of reporting and evaluation requirements will awardees have to complete?
So I mean, more to come on this certainly, but one of the big ones that is important to keep in mind is the overall goal of this grant program is to reduce our water use. So one of the big reporting requirements, both in the initial application and then as you're actually going through with the projects and programs, is reporting on the actual amount of water conserved. So reporting on, acre feet of water conserved is an important thing to keep in mind. There'll be some other reporting requirements, certainly, but that's the big one to keep in mind. And then we'll have more information coming soon for the other requirements.
And then Tim Walsh asked, is there any consideration or a possibility to increase the 250K limit for individual projects? And he added, recharge basins will come in significantly higher than this.
So Tim, that would be a statutory change. So the legislature would have to take that. There isn't an effort on that currently underway, but I would say that if we see in the future that, we are limited in the projects that we can fund through this grant fund because of that limitation or because of that ceiling, we would absolutely be open to feedback from our stakeholders on that and seeing if we can work with the legislature to make that happen.
And another one from Shina Shea. What do you need to show partnerships exist?
So I think we're fairly flexible on this. I mean, letters of support, having a MOU or memorandums of understanding. We are open to your ideas on how you can show that, but yeah. And
Right.
MOU would certainly qualify that.
That would absolutely work.
Okay. Yeah, that was her next question. If a memorandum of understanding would be acceptable. Another question, or a question from Amanda Trackus: will there be a specified IDC amount? If the IDC is lower than UA IDC at 53.5%, can the difference go toward the match?
I don't totally understand that question, to be honest. So, Amanda, maybe if we could follow up with you offline and get more clarity on that one, that'd be great.
Yep.
Put a note for that. And then a question from Diana Velaz: will we be able to apply for planning and design? We have a variety of county buildings that we need to address for water conservation.
I don't think there's anything to preclude that, for sure. I think it would be a decision by the board or by the committee as to whether they feel like that fits the criteria of the grant. So my recommendation would be, yep, absolutely apply, and let's see what happens.
A question from James O'Donnell: are opportunity zones included?
Let us get back to you on that one, James. I hadn't actually considered that as a possible eligible entity, so I would need to look at sort of the statutory makeup of the opportunity zones to see if they fit within that district or created by statute.
Question from Ola Ya: as an NGO applicant, do we need to attach letters of support from partner cities or other documents?
Yes, that would absolutely help us determine and help prove that partnership.
The next question from John Ford. For the question, how will your water conservation activity align with a local, regional, or statewide water plan or integrated resource management plans? Can you give some specific examples of the type of plans you are interested in aligning with?
Go ahead. I don't know how specific I can be. Maybe Lindsay can be more specific.
I can't be specific on the spot here, but we can certainly follow up on that one too, John.
Yeah, but I would think if there's a city water plan and there are conservation aspects of that, and maybe one of the parts of the city plan is turf removal or it's low water landscaping, and you feel like you have a way to come in with some of this funding and help facilitate that, and it's part of that statewide plan, I think that just continues to go to that partnership and showing that this is something that there are multiple people bought in, there are multiple ways to find that support. So it's kind of something like that. Again, it's not very specific, but that's kind of the thought we have in mind.
Great. Next question from Neil Gintz. When do you expect to award the winning applications for this cycle?
Great question, Neil. So in the June board meeting timeline, we were hoping to award the first round of grants. And just to clarify as well, so all of the applications that we receive, they might not be presented in the very first presentation to our committee and board. They will still be presented eventually to the committee and board. So we're hoping to have that first round or first group of the round one awarded in the June timeline. But then shortly after that, we'll have all projects and programs presented to our committee and board.
Yeah, if we have too many projects to present in June, I mean, think that's a good problem for us to have, but I'm saying that as someone who doesn't work on the projects team, that's gonna have to evaluate them all. So, but yeah, that June timeline is what we're hoping for.
Great. Another question from Anna Olaya. Can we include a sub award to a partner NGO?
Another good question I think we'll
Yeah.
have to follow up on. The one thing I would caution on giving out any sub awards is that then you are going to be responsible for the sub-recipient monitoring because of the federal award dollars. But if it's allowable, we'll have to follow up on that.
Another question from Shina Shea. Can the full amount of the 25% match be made through in-kind contributions, or will there be will there need to be a combo with cash?
There's no requirement in the statute that it has to be one or the other. So nothing to prevent it all from being in kind.
A question from Silvana Burgos. How often will application rounds open?
So we're hoping every 2 months for this next year, basically. So we're hoping basically we will continuously have an open round for someone to apply over the next year.
The next question is from Robin Interpreter. Can the Water Conservation Grant Program provide funding to support elements of a project that is being funded with Clean Water SRF loan funds if it supports the grant objectives?
Really great question, Robin. That is actually something on our list of questions as well that we are working to get answered.
And there may be a distinction between supporting elements of the SRF project and using the SRF funds for match as well. So all of that's going to get a little bit jumbled, and we're trying to get clarity on that as soon as we can.
Great. And the next question is from Diana Velaz again. Is this grant on a reimbursement basis, and when will you need to see the matching funds?
Yes, it will be on a reimbursement basis. And then for when we will need to see the matching funds, we are certainly happy to have people apply now, even if you're hoping to get matching funds from another source that's not entirely secured yet. You would need to show that you have the matching funds once we are actually awarding the grant and getting grant agreements in place, and then have them available for when you're starting the project and starting to request reimbursement from us.
And the next question is from Derek. If money is spent before 2026 deadline, but we complete a project in 2027, does it still qualify?
I guess I'm not totally sure on how you're going to spend the money all by 2026, but still have the project going on until 2027. I mean, as long as you spend the money down by that deadline, I think we would be open to that.
Another question from Anna. Will the committee be able to request additional information and corrections for items that may have been unclear in the first cycle?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. And we are hoping that because this is happening in an open committee setting, that we will also be able to have, grant applicants come in and clarify things for the committee on the spot. So.
Okay. Trying to find my place here. The next question is from Veronica Garcia. When will
The eCivis.
Sorry, eCivis application be available?
We are hoping by the end of this week it will be available. We've just run into a few technical glitches, but we are hoping it'll be within the next few days here. And everything that is available right now on our website, as far as the application material, questions that are going to be asked, it's exactly the same as what is going to be in eCivis. It'll just look a little different as far as formatting.
Sounds good. Another question from John Shepard. I would like to note that the matching requirements may be onerous or erroneous for some rural or tribal communities to apply. This is an issue for federal funding opportunities as well.
Yeah, John, we definitely hear that. And again, this is a legislative program, so it would take the legislature to change that. But I think as we continue to get that feedback and as we see projects that folks come to us and say, hey, we would have done this, but for the matching requirement, that gives us the opportunity to go back to the legislature and look at that if the case may be, or if we need to. But we definitely hear that and appreciate that feedback.
Question from Jacob Draper. Not sure if this has been asked, but how does one support a proposal for a watershed restoration on public lands? If federal partners, landowner, do not qualify, then how do we approach that hurdle?
I think if we can follow up offline, that
Yeah.
would be great. That it seems like a very specific question. I'd have to think about that one a little bit more.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And then a question from Bibiana Law. I'm a researcher at UA and collaborate with a company working on water conservation. Can the indirect charge be by the University of Arizona be counted towards the match?
So I think your question is if the private NGO that focus on water conservation is partnering with the university as the public entity, if their indirect charges by the university could be counted as, that's a great question as well. I think we'll have to follow up on that one. So
Okay, I'll put a note.
But that creativity is helpful.
yeah.
Another question from Anna. After an award is made, how long do you expect the contracting with WIPA to take?
Really good question, Anna. I'll tell you after the first one is done. I'm hoping it'll be as, I hope it's as fast as possible, hopefully within a month or two after the grants are awarded, if not less. Because this is a new grant program for us, so I hope everyone is understanding as we try to make sure we're doing everything correctly as well.
The next question from Andrew P. The reimbursement process policy indicates an invoice is required for services rendered. If a program is run in-house through direct payments to customers or bill credits, etc., would this prevent the reimbursement funds from being dispersed, or will you work with us on the best way to invoice?
Yeah, we're absolutely happy to work with you on the best way to invoice. If it's just internal documents that can show that the costs were incurred and are eligible expenses, I don't see any issues with that. So.
A question from Emily Brown. We have heard from others that federal funding from upcoming additional conservation funding opportunities could be used as our match contribution. Can you elaborate on this and whether that would be permitted?
So Emily, that could absolutely be permitted. I think it might depend on the source of that federal funding. Again, we're a little unclear on whether that federal funding is ARPA specific, whether we can use that as the match. But if it's something coming from NRCS, if it's something coming from BOR, absolutely you could use that as matching contribution. And that's exactly the kind of partnerships and cobbling together of funding sources that I think is going to be really helpful for this program.
And then I think this is the last question from Sandra. Can you tell us more about what you're looking for in terms of environmental costs? Oh, I'm sorry, it scrolled because someone else asked another question. Let me.
Yeah, I see the question there, Sam. So
Yeah,
as far as in terms of the environmental costs and benefits, we did try to make it clear in the questions we were asking that relate to the benefits of the project on some of the different viewpoints and different angles that you could take at describing the environmental costs and benefits. But that is very much going to be on you all to define that as well. So.
And okay, perfect. And then the last question is from Sasha. Do you have an idea of when cycle 2 will be?
Yeah, so we're hoping shortly after the round 1 closes, mid-May, we will have round 2 open.
And we don't have any other questions in the chat at this
Okay.
time. So, yeah.
All right, great. Well, we have just a few more slides, so I will go over these last slides here. We are going to focus now on the eCivis aspect of this application process. As we already kind of mentioned, we don't have that eCivis link working quite yet, but hopefully by the end of this week, we will have it open and ready for you to apply that way. So just briefly, if you're not aware of what eCivis is, it is the state's grant management portal. It is an online application portal, and it also helps us to track the grants at post-award. So it has a lot of benefits to going through eCivis, but it is a new process for us here at WIFA, so it is still a learning process for us. So as far as eCivis though, the first steps you're going to be wanting to take right now is to make sure that you are able to log into eCivis, create an account. You can create the portal account through that login link right there. And then as you are creating your accounts and working to get an understanding of eCivis, we want to make sure we highlighted that there's a lot of great resources out there for guidance on how to work with the eCivis platform. If you're looking at their website, they have their documents all listed under that little icon in the bottom right of their screen. Additionally, there's a lot of really great resources on the grants.az.gov website that has the eCivis user guides. We definitely recommend people check those out. There's different webinars and recordings of how to use this system. So encourage you all to start looking at all of that. This is just a screenshot of what the portal looks like as you're logging in. You'll want to, like I said, set up a new account for the system. If you haven't logged into eCivis ever, it's a good idea to just get that started now. You'll create a profile within the system, and then you should be able, like I said, hopefully within this week, look through eCivis and be able to find our Water Conservation Grant Fund and that first round application. There'll be a button that will say apply now, and then it'll walk you through a fillable form that looks exactly like the questions that we have posted on our website, but it's just in a fillable format in the online version. So that is the eCivis website. We do also have the budget worksheet as the Excel file, which will be uploaded into eCivis, so it will also be more of a fillable form instead of an Excel sheet. And I know that we said we could bring that up. Let's see. Before I bring up the Excel file though, the budget items, it'll look just like that when you're actually putting in your budget. So let's see if I can, yeah, if you can, okay. We're gonna have Garrett go ahead and share the Excel file so we can look at the budget worksheet so everyone has an idea of what is in there. But any questions on eCivis? And if you do, they might not be questions we can answer today, but definitely looking for any questions you might have on how it will work in eCivis.
Currently none in the chat. So if you have any questions, type them out now.
And yes, we do have Sandra Veers. I see you, Sandra. Thank you so much for joining. She is our eCivis expert and can answer any of those types of questions.
Oh, and we had one come in from Dan. I was able to log into eCivis this morning and begin the process and start the application. Oh, that's not really a question. And then a question from Steve Shepard. You have to have an eCivis grant network login.
It's a grant network or a portal login, and to be honest, I get the two confused. So you do have to have an eCivis login. And Sandra says that you can have the free portal login. Yes. Thank you, Sandra.
And then Asia has asked, can you have multiple eCivis users for a single organization?
You have multiple eCivis users for a single organization. Yes, you can. And then Sandra says, but, and I don't know if it's possible to elevate Sandra to a panelist so she can speak. Okay. Sandra, we might try to make it so that you can unmute yourself.
Sandra, give me just a second. I think I can elevate you from our end. All right, Sandra, you should be able to unmute and speak now.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So yes, back to the question. You can have multiple users with their own individual profiles. The important note is that only the person creating the application at the time of application will have access to the application data, right? So unless you're sharing a login password with your peers for application development, then that would be the only way. After an application becomes awarded, multiple team members can be added to any particular award, but that happens in post-award, not during application. Does that answer the question?
I think so, Sandra. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Perfect.
And the next question comes from JW Jennings. Do I need to find the different NGO partners to do the different projects, or can you guys do that?
To find the different NGO, well, yes, if you are a public entity who wants to partner with the NGO or vice versa, it is on you to find those partnerships. Yep.
No other questions currently.
Let us work on getting the budget spreadsheet up. Yep.
Oh, another question came in from Thomas. So to be clear, this application is administered through eCivis?
Yes, this application is going to be administered through eCivis. I know there might be some confusion because if you look at our website, there's an apply now button on our website. That is for the SRF programs. We're working on getting that updated, but it will be administered through eCivis. The full application will be fillable in the eCivis platform.
The next question is from Steve Shepard. You can't search for the grant through the eCivis portal. Will the information you post for eCivis have the specific link? I had to go through eCivis tech support to find anything.
Yeah, and it will absolutely be easier to find. We'll have the links everywhere. We'll send out the links through our email platforms and everywhere else that we can put it. I know someone said they already started their application. I don't think it's actually possible to get it submitted quite yet through eCivis, so it's still a work in progress. We do have, pull up our budget sheet here. Sure. All right, so here is the Excel file with the budget sheet. Better. So there's the different line items for the budget sheet. We are working within the allowable budget template from the governor's office, so that this is what we have to work with. Happy to take any questions on this. It is different than the normal budget sheets that we also work with, so we are also working through our own questions about this. But if there's any specific questions, but basically we have the amount for personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, any contractual amounts, construction or indirect costs. And then you put the units, the unit costs, and then we'll figure out the total amount.
And a question from Joanne. Yeah, can you add rows for personnel?
So like rows under the personnel main category to add additional rows?
Yes.
And I might kick that over to Sandra. Is that
Yes,
possible
that's-
for them, at least for their own tracking purposes?
Yeah, so that should be totally possible for the internal template within the platform. You can add rows to any one of those categories. You can have 10 rows, 5 rows, 1 rows. The category is capped at the category naming level. So if you're looking to cap your expenditure, you want to cap it at the categorical level versus line items, right?
Thank you, Sandra.
Welcome.
And another from Joanne, are they combined or the same for others?
I don't quite
Okay.
understand. I'm not understanding that question, so if we want to follow up.
Does it apply?
Okay.
I think.
Okay, and then the next question is from Erica. Is this for all years of the project / program, or should it be broken up by year, by year?
It would be for the entire length of the project or program that you are submitting for, which, ideally ends in December 2026, that you're planning to be completed by. But certainly if you were just applying for a 1 year's worth of project or program costs, then it would just be for the 1 year.
And Erica has asked, is this for all year? And Veronica has asked, does the total amount need to equal to the total project costs, grant amount plus match funds, or just include the grant amount totals?
It should show, let me follow up on you on that, actually. Let me confirm before I answer that. So we will follow up with you. Thanks for that question.
Okay. The next question is from Anna. What is extended cost? Would you mind walking through the columns briefly?
I would
I
love
can
to
help.
get back to you on that, to be honest. We are still working through exactly how these, the extended costs and everything else. So great questions, and we appreciate them.
Question from Greg. Do you want a single number for personnel or individual personnel costs?
I think a single number would be easier for us, but if it makes more sense for you to split it apart so that it's easier for your own tracking, we're open to that.
Question from Nathan Smith. You show an indirect cost column and indirect cost row. Is that duplicating costs?
That's another great question. We'll follow up on you with you on that one.
Another question from Greg. Please send the follow-ups to all registered for this webinar. Yes, we definitely will.
Absolutely. We'll send follow-up to everyone that registered, as well as the recording for this presentation will be sent to you all directly after, and then it will be posted on our website in a few days, hopefully, but you will all be receiving the recording from this immediately. So.
Yeah.
And answers to all of your very good questions as soon as we get answers for you all. So.
And then a question from Gary. If the match is cash, does it matter how it is distributed across budget categories, and why is the indirect cost both a column and a row?
So if the match is cash, then I don't think we necessarily care which budget line item that you are putting that towards. And great question on the indirect costs, and we will follow up on that.
No other questions currently.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing. All right. So we definitely appreciate everyone's attendance today. We appreciate all of your really great questions. We know that this is coming at you all very quickly. We are working our best to get clarity on all the information that might still be confusing for you all. We're very excited to see what you are going to be applying for. We are here to help however we can, and we're just really excited about this going forward. So please continue to reach out, continue to ask those really great questions, and we will be following up with all of that information. So I will go ahead and say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Bye.